on the line and joined by Denver. The time now is exactly 11:15. Thanks to Jamie Fredericks for holding it down on 89.5 FM. Denver, how are you?
I'm good on yourself.
Sweet.
I'm good.
You sound far. I don't know what's up with your phone. Is it your...
okay. I think I put the phone on speaker.
Yes, you sounded far.
Is that sounding a bit better?
Yes. How are you?
Okay. I'm well. You know, KhoiKhoi is Cape Town. I don't understand this weather. It's crazy. We're supposed to be in almost summer, but I'm good. And your side?
Sweet. Awesome, man. And obviously, as we, with the Khoi community, we know that with Amazon, we know that with a whole lot of things, man, where Khoi community has been fighting for its rights, also to be recognized by the South African government. There's a whole lot of things, social ills that are happening on the side, but at the same time also celebrating the heritage on its own.
Yeah, no. I think there's such a lot of issues. And you know what you're talking about is the fact that, you know, that there are these challenges, you know, and yet, you know, there aren't a lot of spaces that addresses these challenges, you know, because largely as the Khoi people, our identity and who we are is still erased, you know, and the colored identity was largely responsible for that erasure, the kakapusa. And so the work we do today is to challenge that and to say, listen here, our historical traumas, the violence that's within our Khoi communities today really comes from the colonial trauma, you know, because they were us that was found here before 1652 that did not have all of the violence that we see today in what is called colored communities. And it's because of that disruption that happened, which is largely erased, ignored in this country.
This reminds me of Chelsea's poem, you know, when she said she's proud of being a colored, you know, when you are who you are, you should embrace yourself in order. Is this kind of like the same in the U.S. where the word nigger was always used to a point where Black Americans flipped the word and used it for themselves and owned the word? Are you saying in that sense?
Yeah, I would disagree. And I think it's not for me to disagree because I personally also feel that everybody is entitled to an identity or to claim a name and to say, this is who I am. But for me, you know, it's also very important that when you claim a name, that it comes from a place of knowledge and understanding and recognizing the historical violence that came with this colored identity, that none of us chose the name colored, just like our people in America, you know, nobody wanted to call themselves the N word. Even you know, nobody wanted to call that. That was forced upon us by people who stripped us of our land and language and culture. And so when we reclaim those words, do we do it from a place of knowledge, or do we do it because it's everybody around us just does it, and now we feel like, okay, now we're going to claim this because this is all we know? And for me, that is highly problematic because we have to challenge the names that were forced upon our people and ask, why was it done? And for me, when a person calls themselves a colored in 2022, especially a younger person, I'm very concerned because it speaks to a system that is still intentional, to not educate our people, you know, to say, let's think critical about this term colored, because can a human being, and it's very similar to the black identity, you know, none of us in Africa ever called ourselves black, just like nobody called ourselves colored. We had a name that identified us to a group, that identified us to a language, that spoke about a heritage and a culture. And when you strip away all of that, to put people then in an identity that refers to them as a colored or a black person, that is violent. And so for me, you know, I'm not going to challenge people when they say, okay, I'm going to call myself this and that. But I'm hoping that in that, there's also a consciousness to interrogate why do I just accept this, which was forced upon our people? And a Khoi identity for me, KhoiKhoi or Khoi means people, and it absolutely connects us to the land, to Africa, to a language, to a culture, to a heritage. And there's nothing as beautiful as to connect yourself to Africa. So when people say, I'm going to be proudly colored, you know, I get a bit uncomfortable, but it's also not my uncomfortability to get, because, you know, we are entitled to the self-define, but let it come from a place of knowledge. You know, that for me is important.
If you have just tuned in now, speaking to Denver, as we are in the annual International KhoiKhoi First Nation Language Week, which seeks to celebrate and awake a first language of Southern Africa. You know, the words of Sarah Batman, Krotoa, David Sturman, and Dolman, who are also there. And also, apparently this year's theme is Ukaita, or is it Ukate? How am I saying? Am I saying it right?
No, you're saying it right, you know.
Oh, okay.
There's no such thing as right or wrong. You're saying it. And I think just by you saying it on air, that is the kaima. That's the revolution. Because remember when Jan van Riebeeck came here in 1652, they were going to be intentional. Anapeka, they were going to erase the language. They were going to take it away from a Khoi tongue, because that is how they could justify their violence, because now they could say that we no longer exist. And it has been hundreds of years of violence, and yet this language was still there all the time. And now she's breaking through. So Ukaite means to lift up. Because it's not just about the words that we lift up. We also lift up the people of First People. And, you know, when we talk about First People, it's the people who's lived on these lands for thousands of years, you know, whose language and culture informed this land, who everybody found here, who were just erased. So, ukaite, you know, means lift up. And for me, I often just tell people, KhoiKhoi doesn't just, it's not just the words that we lift up. We also lift up ourselves and in our sense of, I'm an African, you know, I'm a person of this land. I belong here. And when your tongue does not connect, you always walk around with that sense of disconnect.
Ish, yeah, ne? As they're calling it the third world. What's crazy, Denver, is that what I've noticed, especially when it comes to ancient history, you'll find that a lot of indigenous languages, most of them were erased. You know, if you go to Southern America, it's the same story. If you go to North America, the so-called Indians in the U.S., it was the same. Even here in Africa, you know, Southern Africa with the Khoi. Why was that the case, you know, of trying to erase these languages?
Yeah, and you know, somebody reminded me last week again, it was really just about land and resources, you know, and when you erase a people's language, you know, you erase their identity, you also erase the solidarity and the fighting within those people, because to strip a people's tongue is to strip a people's words and to dehumanize them and to turn them into your slaves. And so that was a common thing of colonizers across the world, you know, one of the first things they would do. And it was interesting to read about this the other day also, you know, that even in modern day wars, when an invader, a country goes into a space, the first thing they do is they destroy the language and culture of a people, because that completely disempowers those people. And so to take away a language and a culture of this land made it easier for them to not only take away our land, you know, because now we were almost defeated psychologically, because language loss is a psychological defeat. It's a psychological genocide. And, you know, whatever you do to people after you've contaminated their minds, you know, you can do anything to them. So that thing about language and cultural destruction was part of the colonizers taking away a people's land and taking away a people's resources and then ending up enslaving a people. And so this happened across the world. I think for me, it's how South Africa, you know, sort of got to the point post 1994 where this was going to be erased, where now 1652 and the Dutch and the British and what they did to our Khoi people, that was documented was now not going to be part of the curriculum, the education, or the popular education, and that is really problematic because you take away the violence that built a country, then you sit and wonder, but why is this country so violent? It's because no space has been made to confront and reflect and really heal from that violence. And so, that is really also why South Africa, for me, sometimes continues to be such a violent country, because there has been this intentional kakapusa, erasure of that violence. That violence came in 1652 with these people from the Netherlands on these boats. They were cruel. They had no humanity. And now today we just have to forget. But we can't. We absolutely can't.
It almost worked, though, on erasing these languages because, for example, in South Africa, we have 11 official language, but the Khoi language is not one of these official language. But the crazy thing is almost all these 11 official language, you find Khoi in it.
Absolutely. And that is the irony. And you know what's so interesting? What's so interesting about that? And we spoke yesterday because there's this thing to just erase Khoi history. And it's so problematic because just yesterday we were talking about how, you have the Nelson Mandela Museum in Umtata in the Eastern Cape. And so I sent them an email to say that, listen here, you have a new council. We do hope that you're going to be responsive to KhoiKhoi as a first language of the Eastern Cape. But then, doing a bit of research, again, we are reminded that they do say that Nelson Mandela had a Khoi mother. But then, and you can correct me, they say that Nelson Mandela belonged to a clan called Madiba. But when you research Madiba, you try and understand, does it have a Xhosa a meaning? Does it exist in the Xhosa language? And it kind of doesn't, but where it does exist is in KhoiKhoi, because Madib in KhoiKhoi, Ma means to give, and the Dib means the action of giving. So ironically enough, the KhoiKhoi gave the name Xhosa to this group, and funny now, it sort of also looks like the clan name of Nelson Mandela, coming from KhoiKhoi, was also given by a Khoi people. And so those are interesting questions for a post-1994 South Africa to ask, And so when we take away KhoiKhoi as a language, nobody suddenly understands where the name Madiba comes from. But when you suddenly put KhoiKhoi there, you can literally see that Madiba has a KhoiKhoi meaning. And it becomes interesting because, again, we know the conversation has only ever been that Nelson Mandela had a Khoi mother, so why are we erasing? And so it's not just erasing Khoi, Khoi from our Khoi people, but also from Xhosa groups, from this country, Xhosa groups who also had some Khoi, there's some Xhosa people who have Khoi heritage. And so when we erase a language, we are depriving, for me, a Khoi people, but also Xhosa people and the whole country. And that is an injustice. For me, that is an injustice to this country that should be addressed.
Okay, Denver, what we do is we're going to hold that thought, and then after the news, we're going to come back into it. Is that fine to you?
Okay, it's all good, all good.
Denver, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you very much again for joining us. Thanks to Mitchum George for giving us the news at 11 o'clock. Catch him again at 11:30, telling us what's happening around the world. If you have just joined us now, I was speaking to Denver regarding the annual International KhoiKhoi First Nation Language Week, which starts on the 1st of December until the 7th of December. So, Denver, please tell us more about the Khoi First Nation Language Week.
Yeah, Kushi. So it's basically really, again, just a celebration of KhoiKhoi as a first language. And I think what you said earlier was the fact that it really was a language that informed and sort of changed almost all languages. The fact that of Dutch could no longer call themselves Dutch and ended up being called Afrikaans, which basically meant that KhoiKhoi, which was really the first people to talk this Dutch dialect, KhoiKhoi Africanized this Dutch dialect Africanized Dutch at the Cape calling, and the language had to call itself Afrikaans. The first people to call ourselves Africans on this land were Khoi people. Today, Afrikaners, when we talk about Afrikaners, people think it's Dutch, white people, but it's not. The first people were Khoi people, and again, what is Xhosa? The fact that the word Xhosa comes from KhoiKhoi. The cliques in Xhosa are Khoi cliques. The cliques are also then found in Sotho and Tswana, which all have so many Khoi words in it. That talks about how important this language was. Again, it was the language of the wealthiest people on these lands. Everybody knew that our Khoi people was crazy wealthy in cattle, in land that we were on these lands. And so when you come and engage and trade with the wealthiest people, you have no choice but also to learn some of the words. And that is what happened. And sadly, 300 years of colonial violence just saw a Khoi people the language and culture erased. Again, there was these intentional systems of erasing our Khoi people, our bodies from this land. But we are still here. Even though we are confused by calling Afrikaans or our mother tongue or the English, there are Khoi words that are still found in our communication. Words like Abba and Kwacha. And the KhoiKhoi Language Week is basically to say that this language was a language that was spoken here, and we still remember some words, and we need to celebrate, acknowledge, but also push this language, and ask, where is it? Why is it still erased? Why is it not in schools? Why is it not able for everybody to just learn some KhoiKhoi wherever there are educational processes happening?
Denver, I don't know if you will be able to answer this, for example, firstly to agree with you, weed, weed, the people smoking weed and all that, in Xhosa, to respect, that tobacco, they call it, Icuba labatwa, which means, the tobacco of the Khoi people, Abatwa, which is another word, which is a respectful word to say the Khoi, and also, Abatwa is because the reason they're saying Abatwa is because the Twa people, or yes. So, but I want to know. Yes, but I want to know though, what did the Khoi people call themselves? Because you find that even they were called the San, the Bushman, the Khoi, Abatwa. There's a whole lot of different names, being called by these other different cultures or languages. But now, what did they call themselves?
Yeah, again, Kushi, why language is so important? Because KhoiKhoi was really just sort of a name that they do say today was about praising ourselves, to say that we are KhoiKhoi, that we are people of people, that we respect the humanity within the people. Because KhoiKhoi, the name, the language, the culture is rooted in the belief of the importance of the person, the humanity, that your life and your presence matters. But there was obviously also other KhoiKhoi names. And so today there are a lot of names that are still with us. If you go to Knysna today, Knysna, also that name comes from KhoiKhoi. You'll find everywhere you'll see Otenikwa. Now, Otenikwa means the old, and Tani means the honey, like sweet honey, and Kwa means people. So they basically say it's the old honey or sweet people, from the Knysna and George area. If you go to Oudtshoorn, there we have the Atekwa people from Knysna. My mother is from Graafrenet. And there we had the Inkwa people, the Inkwa. And then if you go to, in Cape, there was the Goranaikwa. And maybe some people have heard about Kretua, Kretua, that film that was made, that absolutely horrible film that was made, but it still exists. Kretua was part of the Goranaikwa people, and you can sort of see KhoiKhoi in all of those names. And there were more, Paul and Stellenbosch were the Kokukwa people. And Koko means to look, and Kwa means people. And again, there's also the Namakwa. So KhoiKhoi people had different names for ourselves, and every name today, when you look back, you can find KhoiKhoi words in it and understand those names. And so those are important reclamations, because to take back that is to take back a humanity. To call us colored, to just reduce us to this term colored that stripped everything from us, to strip the words from our mouths. That was all part of the colonial dehumanization, Kushi. And today we are challenging that. We are saying we are Makwas. Makwas means resisting that, Kushi.
And also with Lion's Head being called KhoiKhoi. Am I sorry? I hope I'm saying it right. KhoiKhoi, a sea mountain. Or something like that.
Yeah, Table Mountain had a Khoi name, Kushi. And you are saying it, but there's just a click, the sound that's not there. So it's Uri Uaha. Uri Uaha. Uri Uaha. Uri means the ocean or sea.
Yes,
Uaha means rises.
Apparently, the sea rises. Mountain, which is the mountain that was looking at the sea, which was the Lion's Head. It's crazy, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. But Denver, I want to know also why in 1994. Obviously, this is your personal opinion, but why after 1994, South African government couldn't take the language and make it the national language, or we didn't have people that can translate the language properly? What was the case? Because it's only now, 2022, we're trying hard to scramble the language, trying to find certain words. I know that on our national emblem, we have these Khoi names that are there, if you look at them in all these government buildings, there are still Khoi names there. But why couldn't the South African democracy couldn't embrace the language and make it the official language of the land?
Kushi, that's always an interesting, and again, it's just going to come from me. For me, I think there was a lot of pressure for the government to just move on. The TRC was just this bit of reconciliation. And there was a lot of pressure and also fear from, which I think government, when they were going to acknowledge KhoiKhoi as a language, they had to then go back to the historical violence of a Dutch and British people that started in 1652. And I feel like our government was sort of afraid to open up those baggage. Because, I often tell people there's a lot of resistance, Makwas, to a Khoi identity because it comes with baggage. It comes with conversation of genocide. It comes with a conversation of reparations. And sadly, our government were not going to open themselves up to that. And it is quite sad because KhoiKhoi healing is a country healing. You can't have, Kushi, literally such a origin first people walking around without the language, without the culture, without knowledge of self. Imagine that. Imagine you come to a person's house and that person is confused about who that person is. There's something grossly unjust about that, Gucci. And yet this is what happened to South Africa. So it really was very sad that 30 years ago, when we had this new democracy, we didn't see an intentional work going forward to say that can we now look at the historical violence that started in 1652 with the people that are still here. And again, it was about resources. Now we have to open the conversation about what was taken violently and we have to give back. And so we are a country who was not going to do that. But we are here today. Khoi people, everybody, there's some sort of recognition that as a country, we can't just pretend that these violences on the First People's body did not happen. We are all making things difficult for ourselves going forward if we don't introspect now and say, what do we do now as a country about this injustice?
So 1st of December until the 7th of December, is to awaken the first language of South Africa. So what do you plan on doing?
Yeah, no, again, the KhoiKhoi Language Week is an open event, Kushe. It's not just for us, it's not tied to an organization or tied to one to a group of people. It's really for everybody, whether you identify as Khoi, whether you are not Khoi, to say there is this first language that we know we should all learn a bit, because it opens this land. And so what do we do? And so I'm hoping that everybody who hears this our conversation here, whether at school, in creche, at the community center, sort of just thinks, what can I do? And what can you do? You can have a conversation in your community, in your house, with your friends and say, why do we not know that Table Mountain has a Khoi name, Urikuacha? Why do we not know that Cape Town has a Khoi name, KhoiKhoi? Why do we not know that when we use words like Abba or Kwacha or Dacha, that those are Khoi words? Why is that not part of our popular education, And then whether you learn some Khoi words like Taveras, what I'm doing for me, and that is my contribution, Kushi, is that for the last, for the 3 weeks leading up to KhoiKhoi Language Week, every Saturday I'm doing, for 45 minutes, I'm teaching people some Khoi words, and it's been, last week we had our first one, 16 people attended, and it was really just, for me, that is about doing my little bit. And from the 1st to the 7th, there's also an amazing person and group in Sandrift in the Northern Cape, and they've got called the Namakoi theater group, and they are hosting a whole week of activities, where they are just educating, teaching people the language, because their people still speak KhoiKhoi. But it's, again, just having the conversation where like even now, this conversation is about that, challenging the kakapusa or erasure and say, when KhoiKhoi as such a first language, it's not accessible to all of us, what are we all deprived of, Kushe?
To be honest with you, when at first, a lot of, especially in South Africa, a lot of places when they were renamed, streets being renamed to certain names, it cost a lot of money. When I was, when they were doing it, I was like, why are they wasting a lot of money? But as I grow older, I start to see like, oh, damn. There's actually a lot when it comes to identity, names, the way language, the way you say things, because with voice is also a vibration, if you say it, saying certain words, sometimes the things that you're trying to manifest, they don't really come to you because you're saying all these names that are not meant to be said or something like that. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Denver, now as somebody who's listening, maybe at home and all that, what can they do, especially on that week, especially when it comes to self-identity? Sometimes when you start to think and you're thinking to yourself like, man, I don't need to learn this Khoi language because at the end of the day, they're not going to give me money or I'm not even going to find a job. So why is it a must, to learn these languages that are not even used, in the state places, for example, in universities, high schools, even on a normal conversations? Why is it important to learn all these languages? Sometimes we're calling them ancient languages.
Yeah, no, again, Kushi, it's again so important to, that term decolonize, because the colony, Jan van Riebeeck and the Dutch and all of these systems that were forced onto Africa made us believe that we are only valuable if there's value to the colony. Value is only when there's money attached. And that was never an African concept. For us, value, and especially if we look at KhoiKhoi, value was the people and our ancestors and our knowledge and the land and the gifts. And so for me, I look at KhoiKhoi that it is a gift to our ancestors, from our ancestors. It makes us, for me, learning KhoiKhoi has been, oh my word, it's been part of my Purusen. my healing, part of connecting to Africa, part of being part of something. Now I will never go to Mother Tongue Day or Africa Day or to Heritage Day and feel like, oh my word, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? And so for any Khoi person, that is wondering, because this colored identity is about disconnect. It's about making us feel like we don't belong. And there's something about learning KhoiKhoi that suddenly you belong. You connect the words in KhoiKhoi to the words that we already know, like Abba, Kwacha, Dacha. And you feel like I also exist on this land. I'm also part of this land. And again, people will say, oh, there's no value to our languages. But can you ever put a price on the psychological, emotional, healing value of a language? Can you ever put the price on what that makes you feel when there's a conversation about Africa and you can say, wow, my people also spoke. I come from a Khoi people who also spoke a most ancient African language that was taken away. And, again, the value for me, and I always just have the conversation, it's as Khoi people, we have to also recognize the value of KhoiKhoi, that it is part of an economy of African languages. And we have to say that our languages are here and we need spaces in cultural spaces to say that, listen here, make space for our language so that resources that are given to other languages can also be made available to our language so we can also be part of that. And that is then the economic value, that when we say that we exist and our languages matter, that economic spaces is open and we then can be part of the economy. But on a basic level, for me, it is a psychological, the healing value of saying that I matter. I'm an African. I'm not going to say the Africans, because that's often what we hear when we have our Khoi people in this colored identity. We talk about the Africans, like as if we are not African. But it's about recognizing that the Afrikaans language on our Khoi tongue was rooted in the de-Africanization. And when we take back the language, do we only then feel a sense of being connected to Africans and fellow Africans? Then we're no longer going to talk about the Africans as if we ourselves are not Africans also.
If you have just tuned in now, we're speaking to Denver regarding the annual International KhoiKhoi First Language a Nation Language Week, which will be held, or actually starting from the 1st of December until the 7th of December, saying that, decolonizing languages or trying to find your identity, especially when it comes at who you are. As we always say on the show, that never forget where you came from. Otherwise, you won't know where you're going. So, Denver, before we let you go, if people want to get a hold of you, maybe want to ask questions, want to read more regarding what you do, how can they do it?
Yeah, Kusha, I wanted to also just say, my mother called me Denver. That was what she gave me the day I was born. She said, you're now going to be Denver. So that is a name my mother gave me at birth. I later on took on a Khoi name for myself, which was Torocha, and it means fighting spirit. And again, when you said that, asked this question earlier, what does it mean, KhoiKhoi? It's as ancient, it has no value. There's something about when I go into spaces and I say, yes, Denver is my colony name, but I've given myself to Rocha. I've given myself a name in the language that my mother and her mother and all my women would have taught me. And again, there is the sense of pride, Nisa. Because a lot of our Khoi people, Kushi, in this colored identity, we are so ashamed. We are so embarrassed. We see Khoi as an insult. We see it as something that belittles us, and and yet it is also something that can absolutely make us feel like we belong. And so Torocha for me was that thing. I want to say people can contact me. They can WhatsApp me 081-354-2915. I'm going to repeat that, 081-354-2915. They can, they can contact me. They can find out about the things that we're going to be doing. They can connect and Sorry, Kubate. And then also they can email me, Breda, BREDA 2007 at gmail.com, or maybe contact Push Radio, for my details. And again, it is about healing. Guru said, this work is about healing. What Jan van Riebeeck did to our Khoi people, Kushi, was violent. I want to say, I'm going to end off here because, it's very interesting that somebody reminded me that our KhoiKhoi Language Week falls in the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Because a Khoi woman that today has to only teach a child in the words of Jan van Riebeeck, of Dutch people, that is a gender-based violence. That is an act of gender-based violence on a Khoi woman. That is an injustice. And language it's a psychological injustice, just as a physical violence is. And we have to recognize that. So I'm very, it was very interesting to know that, that again, this is also happening because the issues are not so different. Gender-based violence is not just a physical act. For me, it's also the psychological violence. And we have to all challenge that. So, yeah.
Torocha, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Yeah,
I'm calling you by your name that you won now.
Yes, because you can call me Denver, that's all right, but Torocha just roots me on this
I'm
land.
calling you Torocha, no more that other name, that the government name.
Me,
yeah.
The government name.
Thank you very much for speaking to us, Denver.
This was amazing, and people can, that means keep well. Hava Minkwa, we'll chat soon. To the listeners also, Kushi.
Bye, Torocha.
Bye-bye.